really, it's kind of cliched. I wanted to serve my country. I had been an intel analyst for Department of Defense, and that kind of seemed like the next logical step. I was overseas at the time and working as an intel analyst, and I loved being overseas. I loved being in kind of the thick of foreign affairs. So I applied to the agency. I applied just before 9/11, and back then it took a long time to process the application. So in the meantime, I went to law school, and 9/11 happened when I was in law school. And so I'd already my application was already being processed, but it really cemented my decision. I think, it made me feel like this is absolutely the job I want to be in. And I found the job of a case officer was really different from an analyst. Like an analyst, you're really a substantive expert on foreign policy. Case officers, not so much. I mean, you're more an expert on gaining intelligence, on manipulating people, and trying to, figure out someone's vulnerabilities or tradecraft, and how to get intelligence. So it was really a shift. They say it attracts different personality types, and I think that's true. To be honest, I feel like being an analyst was a better fit for me than being a case officer. And I sort of had an inkling of that early on, but I wanted to give it a chance. And I felt like being a case officer, you're sort of in the trenches, and I really wanted to be in the trenches, especially after 9/11, and then again later on. So I did about a year or so of training, and then I started at the agency in 2002. We invaded Iraq in 2003, so not that long after I started at the agency, and I volunteered to go. They needed volunteers, so I thought, better me. I was kind of young and naive, but I was in my 20s. I didn't have a family, so I thought better me than someone with a family. So that was sort of my motivation.
So from then you went to Iraq, or you went to a few other places first?
No, I had been TDY a couple places, but that was my first tour, was Baghdad. So I got there in November of 2004, stayed for about a year to November 2005. That was my first tour. I finished my training in spring of 2004, and then did a little additional training for Baghdad, and then went over there in November.
Now, what was Baghdad like? How different was your experience as CIA compared to like a soldier there?
Very different. Baghdad was awful. It was a war zone, and at the time, I mean, there's no other way to put it. I think anyone who's been in war knows what I'm talking about. Because there's just nothing good about. I mean, there's nothing pleasant about the experience of being in war. And so it was at the time labeled the most dangerous place on earth, Baghdad, and I don't think I was prepared for how bad it was, and I don't know that anyone was really prepared, either institutionally, our institutions, or at an individual level. I don't think officers were really prepared for just how chaotic it was, how dangerous it was. So the military definitely took most of the risk. We were not in the same danger that the military was. That said, everyone in Baghdad, journalists, diplomats, spies, the military, everybody was in danger. I mean, it would be like going now to Israel, which, I don't know when the podcast is going to air, but Hamas has just attacked Israel, and I mean, those kind of situations, it's not safe to be anywhere. Um, so yeah, the military would go out. What was safer somewhat about our situation was we were mostly inside the green zone. And we would occasionally make trips outside in armored vehicles, into the red zone, to pick up a source and then bring the source back in. And let me say too, all this has been cleared by the CIA. If anyone has any questions, because I've written pieces over the years, so I know what I can talk about. But really, for the most part, we relied on sources walking into the green zone, and that was a risk for them too. It was also a risk for us. We would typically wait for them at the checkpoints, and the checkpoints were notorious targets for suicide bombers because they're bottlenecks. So that was always a concern, that waiting for sources at the checkpoint. So it wasn't quite as safe as it sounds. The other thing, even being in the green zone, which was comparatively safe relative to the red zone, but even being in the green zone was awful because we would get bombed with mortars and rockets upwards of 20, 50 times a day, a constant. And I don't know if, like, unless you've been in that situation, it's really hard to describe, but there's a pervasive sense of fear that never leaves you. Like, you are always afraid for your life. And you go to bed at night. We had these kind of flimsy trailers, and you would go to bed at night and just hope that you would wake up in the morning. And I got there, I mean, that summer of 2004. So we invaded in 2003, and the violence, it took a while to ramp up. When we first invaded Iraq, it was not that bad, the violence. And it took a long time. There was sort of a vacuum, and Al Qaeda in Iraq, the leader was Zarqawi, was building up his network, and it took a while. And it wasn't until probably summer of 2004 that it really reached its apex. So I kind of got there at, I think, the apex of the war, and that lasted for several months, until really until the elections, which were, I believe, as I recall, January 2005. And that's a whole other story, but that was actually a huge victory, the elections. It was the first democratic elections in Iraq, and it was amazingly peaceful, and it ushered in a weird peace for a couple months. And there was like this space where democracy had won, and it was amazing and awe-inspiring. And then the violence slowly crept back in, unfortunately, because there really weren't political structures in place to sustain that peace. But to go back to your original question, it was incredibly dangerous. It was not as dangerous as the military, which was going out in convoys every day, trying to literally battle insurgents, literally battle terrorists, which we were not doing. We were trying to gather intelligence, and they were literally fighting, terrorists and trying to apprehend terrorists. And they faced roadside bombs every day. They faced suicide bombers. So there was no comparing the risk we took with the risk the military took. But that said, the risk we took was very high as well. The biggest risk for us was the checkpoints, or letting someone into the green zone. We like I said, we relied on walk-ins, and they obviously had to go through multiple layers of checkpoints. But you never knew, and this was a story that was cleared, and I can talk about it. But there was one instance where one of my sources said that he knew a middleman, an explosives peddler, and to prove it to me, he was going to bring in a small sample of explosives. And so I said, okay, well, I'll meet you outside the green zone and walk you in, because obviously you can't bring explosives into the green zone. So fine. Next thing I know, I'm waiting for him outside the green zone. He's late. He doesn't show up. I call him, and he says, "Oh, I'm inside the green zone. I'm waiting for you." And I don't know if he misunderstood or deliberately misunderstood. I don't, and this was a test of some kind, but somehow he had made it past multiple layers of security, including like a explosive sniffing dog, with explosives. He had brought this sample to show me. And I had brought our explosives expert who verified that these were in fact explosives, and he made it into the green zone. So the point of the story, and like I said, it's been cleared by the CIA, is that these layers of security were not perfect, and someone could get into the green zone, and there were suicide bombs inside the green zone, people who made it in. So did I personally ever witness something? No. No, one time when we were going out to pick up a source in the red zone, we got stopped at a checkpoint, And that was maybe one of the scariest moments for me, because these sort of makeshift they had all these makeshift checkpoints. They weren't official checkpoints. They were just, a lot of them were insurgent checkpoints, and they would just shoot you if you were American, um, or you weren't on the right side, or you were Kurdish. It turned out this was a Kurdish checkpoint, and it was fine. They were friendly, but you never knew. It was a moment where I thought, oh my God, this could be it for me. For our meetings inside the green zone, we had a 2-person rule. We always went with another case officer for safety reasons. When we went outside in armored vehicles in the red zone, we had a security team with us who were professionally trained. And it totally different from like peacetime operations. Like, at the farm, you learn how to do surveillance detection routes. You're the driver, you're the one looking out for surveillance. We were not concerned about that in Baghdad. We were concerned about dying. We were concerned about hitting a roadside bomb or a suicide bomber. I mean, we made these trained kind of paramilitary officers, security officers would drive the vehicles, and it was all about just security. I mean, we would go out and they would map out the routes in advance, and they would go as quickly as possible, pick up the source. We were not, moseying around. Normally in a surveillance detection route, you take your time, you do cover stops, you get a coffee, you buy a magazine somewhere, and all the time you're looking for surveillance. Not true in Baghdad. You're in and you're out. And these guys were trained to do that. And I think they were as well suited for the job as anybody could be. And I think they were heroic, and they kept us all safe, which was wonderful. And then, so in terms of the military, at first we were a little bit isolated from them, because I think the agency, this all happened so quickly, and the agency really didn't know how to operate in a war zone at first. We were sort of shifting operations from traditional to wartime operations, and it was a little bit of an adjustment process. And like I said, all the training I had learned, really a lot of it was not applicable in a war zone. I think we didn't fully understand that in a war, the military runs the show, and they controlled all the checkpoints at the green zone. They were the ones who were going out every day in the red zone. They were the ones who had access to potential sources. They were also the ones who were using our intelligence. And I think it took a while for us to fully grasp that. Because I had worked with the military as an intelligence analyst, I had a little bit of experience working with them. So I sort of reached out to the military and tried to build bridges. And we did build bridges with the military. And so if they had a question about like, well, how reliable is this intelligence? What's the source? Like tell us more about the source. Like, is this intelligence we can trust? Then they could ask us those questions. Or they could tell us like, your officers are going too fast through our checkpoints, or something like that. Or, for example, when I first got there, we had sort of a very antiquated peacetime system where we would write intelligence reports, and they would go up through headquarters. There's a whole chain, and then they would come back down to the consumers, which were the military, which were right next door to us. So it was like this circuitous process, this loop, for something like a roadside bomb. So it would take a week for this process about a roadside bomb, and the military, meanwhile, someone would have died from that bomb. It was this peacetime process that was clunky and just wasn't working. And so, one of the things I did was, if there was time sensitive information, I would literally like hand it to the military, or I would get on the SIPRNet, which is a secret level computer system that the military uses. And it's not as protected as the system we used at the CIA, but it was sufficient for that kind of intelligence. It was tactical intelligence typically would not go above a secret level. So I would get on this SIPRNet system, and I would hand type the information in an email so the soldiers would get it. So those are the kind of shortcuts you learned in a war zone.
Now, finding the source, what's the process of that?
So that's where it's totally different. Peacetime, wartime. Peacetime, you have targets. Maybe you want to go after someone in the local government, and you would, or you come across someone and you would slowly develop them over time. You know, you take them out to eat, you go bird watching, or I don't know, bike riding. It was totally different in Baghdad because you could do none of that stuff. You didn't have the luxury of just going and spotting and schmoozing and developing people, just totally different. So really, we just relied on whatever came to us, and we would sift mostly walk-ins, um, and or occasionally when we built up a relationship with the military, sources the military would give to us. And so really, you would sift through all this information and look for that one kernel that had value, because most of it didn't. Most of it, you know, they would just come in and offer whatever they had in the hope of money or security, and it wasn't very useful. And one of my most lasting, like impactful memories was I had helped to apprehend an alleged top 10 terrorist target through one of my sources. And he was alleged to have participated in the 2003 bombing of UN headquarters in Baghdad, which was really a big deal. And like I said, it was there was a sense of futility, like we just weren't making a lot of headway. So this felt like a big deal to me, you know, that suddenly my source could help apprehend this big fish. And that was like, I mean, that was for me my biggest victory. So basically we were able to track this guy down. He came in to talk to us. Long story short, we questioned him. He didn't confess to anything. Long story short, we ended up arresting him. The military arrested him, detained him, still not confessing to anything. And I will remember that night for the rest of my life, like sitting in this room and watching this man across from me who potentially was responsible for untold deaths. And I remember he didn't want to shake my hand because I'm a woman, and he was quite haughty. And so these are all, and I remember everybody, it was me and a couple other officers and an interpreter, and everyone was smoking. I don't smoke, but everyone else was smoking. So I remember there was like smoke that just filled the room all night. My voice sounded like this afterward. And it was, and it lasted till dawn. And at the end of the meeting, they took him outside and I think they put a blindfold or a bag over his head and took him to another facility where they were going to continue questioning him. And it felt like the biggest victory that I had accomplished there. But here's the thing. So years later, I run into a colleague at the agency, and she had questioned, this guy was still incarcerated. He was still detained. He had been moved to a different facility, and she had questioned him just purely coincidentally. We just happened to run across each other. And years later, he still hadn't confessed to anything. And people were saying, maybe we got the wrong guy. And it was a really sobering moment for me. And it still is. And it's something I've never, I don't know the ending. It's something I've never been able to resolve one way or another. I might have saved a life, or I might not have, or I might have maybe affected this guy's life for the rest of his life, you know? And it's sort of, it's this ambiguity that I have to live with. And I think it's an ambiguity that a lot of people face in war and in spying. And I don't take it lightly. I think about it all the time. And I don't regret anything necessarily. And I don't blame anyone for anything, because I think that's the nature of war, and you do the best you can with the information you have. But that's one of my most profound and haunting memories of my time there.
When you were in the CIA, was it after Iraq you left, or was some other things you had to uh, finish up and then you left?
So I got back from Iraq, and basically after a little bit of time off and I think desk work, I did a year of Farsi language. And I was actually supposed to do a follow-on assignment in Afghanistan. And, and at that point, so that was when I resigned in 2008. So I was there for 6 years. And there were a lot of factors. I was, for me leaving, I was burned out big time and I didn't feel like I could do back to back combat tours. And and to be honest, it was never a great fit. I think I mentioned that earlier, being a case officer, like in retrospect, I think maybe an analyst would have been a better fit for me. So I didn't love the job. And I think given the sacrifice required and the toll it takes on you, I think you have to love the job. I think it never came naturally to me. Like I said, you have to kind of manipulate people and figure out people's vulnerabilities, um, and that never came naturally to me. Um, and I think, and I did it in my 20s, and it's a hard job to have with a family. I think that you, especially like going to a place like Baghdad, it takes a toll on your spouse and your kids. So, um, so I think it was not a long-term job for me. Um, and but I really respect the people who could do it and embrace it. Like I said, it's just not for everyone, but I respect that. I mean, it's someone's got to do it, and you're serving your country. And I will say, like, since I have left, I have, like, the amount of support I've gotten from former CIA officers and former intel types is just amazing. Because I think it's such a singular profession, where um, I mean, there's so little like it. There's really nothing like it, and you've all kind of lived through it, and you all understand it. And so that's been really fortifying to have that network, that support network of other intel types out there, and that's given me a lot of pride in my service.
Well, can I hear about everything you've written about? Well, the book behind you, and was there another book you've written?
Nope, this is my debut. This is my first.
Well, can I hear about it?
Yeah. So it's about an aging spy caught in the crosswinds of the Arab Spring. He has an informant in the opposition, and he kind of has to figure out what the true story is behind the Arab Spring. Like, you've got Saudi, you've got Iran. Who's the right side? Who's doing what? Who should he believe? And then he falls in love, but maybe the woman isn't who he thinks she is. So there's sort of, and he has a little bit of a rival in his young station chief, the main character. So there's kind of a lot of sort of triangles amid the tumult of this conflict. um, and he doesn't know what the truth is. He doesn't know who to believe. He doesn't know which side to choose. And in the end, he is forced to choose a side, and he doesn't know if it's the right one. And there's sort of a twist at the end, but I don't want to give it away. But
Is he a civilian or is he some worker in the government or?
he's a spy. He's a case officer, just like I was. Yeah, just like I was. So, yeah. So I basically used all the tradecraft that I had learned, as a spy, and I kind of transported it to Bahrain and to fiction. But I tried to make the book as realistic as I could. And like, this is the life of a spy. This, for all its grayness and ambiguity and murk and tough decisions and not always, pleasantness. Like, this is the life of a spy, and I kind of tried to put that all into my book.
Now, most of it, well, I'm guessing it's based off of your experience, but getting clear, do you have to get it clear by the CIA first? Of yeah, that's
Yep. Yeah. So I did. You have to get it clear before you show it to anyone. Even like, I could not show it to my husband. I could not show it to agents. I couldn't show you. And I think not everybody abides so religiously by that, but I do. So I was very fastidious about it, and I did not show it to a soul. I took it. took me 5 years to write it, and I wrote it in a vacuum. So it was like a leap of faith. You know, you're writing for, I sat in a Starbucks, and it was like for 5 years, you're wondering, like, this could be the worst book ever. And I've just wasted 5 years of my life. um, yeah, that part was kind of tough, but it was fine. And then at the end of when I was done, I submitted it to the agency, to their publication review board, and they were wonderful, actually. Um, they were not always so lenient and in approving things, but I think they've become much more reasonable over the years. And there's actually not a lot that's people don't realize there's not a lot that's actually classified. Like, people think more is classified than actually is. I mean, there's a ton you can say that isn't even really sensitive. So they were wonderful to work with, and they reviewed it quickly and with minimal redactions. And then at that point, I could submit it to agents and ultimately to publishers.
Now, where can people get this? Amazon, or is there, do you have a website? Well, I think you have a website, don't you? Right?
I have a website.
I
Yeah.
think that's how I found you. I think that was like that was back in the summertime, so I didn't really remember.
Oh,
So
yeah. No, that's great. That's awesome that you found me that way. My website is isberry.net. And yeah, you can find my book everywhere, anywhere books are sold.